The December cold tore through Chicago like a blade wrapped in ice, the kind of cold that didn't just bite, it burrowed deep into bone and settled there like a curse. Snow fell in thick curtains, muffling the city's chaos until all that remained was wind howling through empty streets, and the distant wail of sirens fading into nothing. On a wooden bench outside a shuttered diner, a young woman sat hunched over, arms wrapped so tightly around herself she looked like she was trying to hold her own pieces together. Her thin coat hung open despite the cold. Her bare feet, blistered and bleeding, rested on snow-covered concrete. She'd stopped feeling them hours ago. In her trembling hands she clutched a small gold locket, the chain broken, the clasp bent. Her grandmother's. The last thing connecting her to a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Her name was Mariah James. 20 years old. Dark brown skin ashen from cold and hunger. Coiled hair matted and tangled. Deep brown eyes staring at nothing, hollow and distant, like all the light had been drained out. Her name didn't feel like hers anymore. Not after her husband screamed it at her like a curse. Worthless. Broken. Barren. Before he threw her suitcase onto the porch and told her no man would ever want damaged goods that couldn't even do the one thing women are supposed to do. That was 5 days ago. Maybe 6. Time had blurred into something shapeless she couldn't hold on to. She hadn't eaten. Hadn't slept. A one-way bus ticket brought her from Detroit to Chicago, but once she arrived, she had nowhere to go. So she walked until her feet bled, until her body gave out, until she found this bench and decided she didn't have the strength to move again. Someone had stolen her bag at a rest stop. Her phone, her wallet, her last $37 gone. Now she sat in the merciless dark, lips cracked and bleeding, stomach hollow, chest emptier still. The scars on her abdomen throbbed beneath her clothes. 3 fertility treatments. 2 miscarriages. Countless prayers whispered into the void. Her husband stopped touching her after the second loss. Said she was wasting his money for nothing. He never held her when she cried. Never came to the hospital. Just drank and yelled until one day he simply erased her. There's nothing left, she thought, fingers tightening around the locket until the broken edges cut into her palm. Nothing worth fighting for. Then headlights cut through the snow. A black SUV, sleek and predatory, slowed and stopped. The rear door opened. Footsteps approached, measured, unhurried, deliberate. Expensive leather shoes on frozen pavement. "You're going to die out here." The voice was deep, calm, carrying absolute authority without needing to be loud. She didn't move. Her body had learned that men who approached in the dark rarely brought kindness. But this voice didn't demand. It waited. Slowly, she lifted her head. The man stood 6 feet away, towering and broad-shouldered in a tailored black suit. Dark hair slicked back. Sharp jaw. Ink crawling up his neck and disappearing beneath his collar. Storm gray eyes that held no pity, no judgment, just quiet recognition. He shrugged off his coat and held it out. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her voice came out broken. "Why would you help me?" He was silent, his gaze dropping to the locket in her bleeding hands. To the way she flinched even though he hadn't moved. "Because I know what it looks like when someone's been discarded," he said quietly. "And I know what it feels like to have everything taken from you." He draped the coat over her shoulders without touching her. It was warm. It smelled like cedar and smoke and something she couldn't name. "My name is Stefan Luigi." The name hit her like a fist. Everyone in Chicago knew that name. Mafia boss. Blood. Power. Fear. "I have 3 sons who need someone," he continued. "And you need somewhere to go. I'm offering you a door. You can walk through it, or you can stay here and let this city finish what he started." Mariah stared at this dangerous man offering salvation. And she took his hand. But before we dive deep into this story, kindly like, share, and subscribe and comment down below where you're watching from. Your support goes a long way in helping us bring you more stories like this. Keep watching to discover how 3 motherless boys gave Mariah reason to believe in family again. The first time Mariah felt the word broken settle into her bones, she was 24 years old, lying on a paper-covered exam table while a doctor with tired eyes told her the pregnancy wasn't viable. "These things happen," he'd said, like it was nothing. Like the life she'd been whispering promises to for 8 weeks was just a statistic. Her husband hadn't come to the appointment. He said he had to work. She'd driven herself home, pulled into the driveway, and sat in the car for 2 hours before she could make herself go inside. The second time came 14 months later. Same hospital. Different doctor. Same devastating words. This time her husband was there, but he stood by the window instead of holding her hand. When the doctor left, he turned to her and said, "Maybe you're not cut out for this." Not, "We'll try again." Not, "It's okay." Just cold assessment, like she'd failed a test she should have passed. After that, the fertility clinic became her second home. Needles and hormones and calendars marking her body's failures in red ink. $30,000 they didn't have. Credit cards maxed out. Her husband's resentment growing with every bill, every negative test, every month that passed without the result he demanded. He stopped saying her name and started calling her, "you," or not addressing her at all. He ate dinner in front of the television. Slept on the couch. Looked through her like she was a ghost already. The final diagnosis came on a Tuesday. Severe endometriosis. Scarring. Complications that made conception nearly impossible without invasive surgery that might not even work. The doctor had been gentle, apologetic even, but Mariah barely heard the words. She was too busy watching her husband's face harden into something cold and final. That night he got drunk. Told her she'd trapped him into marrying damaged goods. That any real woman could give a man a child. That she was useless. The argument escalated until he was screaming and she was crying and his hand closed around her wrist so hard she felt something crack. He didn't apologize. Just released her, pointed to the bedroom, and told her to get out of his sight. 3 days later, he threw her out completely. Packed a suitcase, tossed it on the porch, and locked the door. She'd stood there in the rain, knocking, begging, until the neighbors started watching. Then she'd picked up that suitcase and walked away from the only life she'd ever known. Now, on this frozen bench with frostbite setting in and her body shutting down, Mariah wondered if this was what she deserved. If God was punishing her for being defective. If her husband had been right all along. The man's hand was still extended. Waiting. Not pushing. Stefan Luigi. A name that meant violence and power and danger. She should run. She should refuse. She should do anything except what she was about to do. But dying slowly on this bench felt worse than whatever danger waited in that SUV. "If you hurt me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "it won't matter. There's nothing left to break." Something shifted in his expression. Not pity. Understanding. He meant what he said. He knew what it looked like to be discarded. "I won't," he said simply. She didn't believe him. But she was so tired of fighting. So tired of being cold. So tired of everything. Mariah placed her frozen hand in his. His grip was firm but careful, like he knew exactly how fragile she was. He helped her stand, her legs barely supporting her weight, and guided her toward the SUV where warmth and light spilled from the open door. She looked back once at the bench, at the spot where she'd been ready to give up. Then she climbed into the vehicle, and the door closed behind her, sealing her old life outside in the snow. Whatever came next couldn't be worse than what she was leaving behind. The SUV moved through Chicago like a shadow, silent except for the low hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of a radio from the front seat. Mariah sat pressed against the leather interior, Stefan's coat still wrapped around her shoulders, watching the city blur past tinted windows. The heat was on full blast, but she couldn't stop shivering. Cold had a way of living inside you long after you escaped it. Stefan sat across from her, his phone glowing in the darkness as he typed something with quick, precise movements. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the bench. Hadn't asked her questions or demanded explanations. Just let her exist in the warm silence, and somehow that felt like the greatest kindness anyone had shown her in years. 20 minutes later, the SUV slowed and turned through massive iron gates that opened automatically. Mariah pressed closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. What she saw made her stomach drop. The mansion rose from the snow-covered grounds like something out of a dark fairy tale. 3 stories of pale stone and glass, all sharp angles and cold elegance. Floodlights illuminated the perimeter, casting long shadows across manicured lawns buried under fresh powder. Armed men in dark suits stood at intervals along the drive, their breath misting in the frozen air. Security cameras rotated slowly, mechanical eyes watching everything. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress. The SUV pulled into a circular drive and stopped beneath a massive portico. Stefan stepped out first, then extended his hand. Mariah took it, her bare feet touching heated stone for the first time in days. The difference nearly made her cry. The front doors opened before they reached them. A man stood in the entrance, tall and lean with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. He looked at Mariah the way someone might examine a stray dog brought in from the cold, wary, assessing, already calculating the complications. "This is Marcus," Stefan said. "He runs security. Anything you need, he'll handle it." Marcus gave a curt nod but didn't smile. "Ma'am." The foyer stole what little breath Mariah had left. White marble floors stretched into the distance, reflecting the light from a crystal chandelier that hung 3 stories above. A grand staircase curved upward, its wrought iron railing twisted into intricate patterns. Everything gleamed. Everything was cold and beautiful and utterly foreign. "She'll need clothes, food, medical attention," Stefan said to Marcus, his tone clipped and efficient. "Guest room in the east wing. Away from the boys until morning. Already prepared, boss." Marcus turned his sharp gaze to Mariah. "This way." She followed him up the staircase, her filthy feet leaving faint marks on pristine marble. Stefan disappeared down a hallway without another word, his phone already pressed to his ear. She heard fragments of conversation, something about shipments and territories and problems that needed solving, before his voice faded into the depths of the house. Marcus led her through a maze of corridors, each one wider than her old apartment's entire living room. They passed closed doors and empty sitting areas, everything decorated in shades of cream and gray and black. Expensive art hung on walls. Sculpture stood in alcoves. It felt like walking through a museum after hours, beautiful and lifeless. He stopped at a door near the end of a long hallway and pushed it open. "Your room." Mariah stepped inside and froze. The bedroom was enormous. A king-size bed dominated the space, covered in white linens that looked like they'd never been slept in. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined one wall, currently covered by heavy drapes. A sitting area held a velvet couch and matching chairs. Doors led to what she assumed was a bathroom and closet. "Bathroom stocked," Marcus said from the doorway. "Clothes in the closet should fit until we can get you properly outfitted. Doctor will check you over in the morning." He paused, his expression hardening. "The boss doesn't make many charitable gestures. This is one of them." Mariah turned to face him, exhaustion making her sway slightly. Marcus's voice dropped lower and colder. "Those 3 boys downstairs are the only thing in this world Stefan Luigi gives a damn about. The only weakness he's got. You hurt them, disappoint them, fail them in any way, and it won't matter that he brought you here." His eyes were granite. "Don't make him regret this." The threat hung in the air between them, clear as glass. "I won't," Mariah whispered, though she had no idea if she could keep that promise. She didn't even know what he expected from her. Marcus studied her for another long moment, then nodded once. "Food's coming up. Eat. Sleep. Tomorrow you meet the boys." He pulled the door closed behind him, and the soft click of the lock sounded impossibly loud. Mariah stood alone in the center of the massive room, still wrapped in Stefan's coat, her broken locket clutched in one hand. She should explore. She should shower. She should do something other than stand here like a ghost haunting someone else's palace. Instead, she walked to the bed and touched the comforter. It was soft. Real. Clean. She'd forgotten what clean felt like. She climbed onto the mattress, not bothering to pull back the covers, and curled into a ball. The bed was too big. The room was too quiet. Everything was too much, and not enough all at once. But she was warm. And for the first night in almost a week, she was safe. Sleep came fast and dragged her under like a tide. But with it came the nightmares, her husband's face twisted in rage, doctors shaking their heads, blood on bathroom tile, empty cribs in empty rooms, and the cold, always the cold. She woke screaming 3 hours later, her voice raw and desperate, her body thrashing against sheets soaked with sweat. The door burst open and Marcus filled the frame, gun drawn, eyes scanning for threats. He found only her, broken and sobbing and wishing she'd frozen to death on that bench after all. Marcus holstered his weapon and stepped back into a hallway without a word, pulling the door closed with something that might have been gentleness. Mariah lay in the darkness, listening to her own ragged breathing, and wondered what kind of hell she'd traded the cold for. Morning came too soon, announced by pale winter light bleeding through gaps in the heavy drapes. Mariah woke to find a tray of food on the nightstand, scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit, coffee still steaming, though she hadn't heard anyone enter. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind already bracing for whatever came next. A soft knock preceded Marcus's entry. He carried a stack of clothes, simple jeans, a soft sweater, thick socks. "Doctor cleared you. Minor frostbite, malnutrition, dehydration. Nothing that won't heal." His tone was clinical, detached. "The boys are in the dining room. Stefan wants you to meet them now." Her stomach twisted. "What does he want me to do?" "Be there," Marcus said simply. "That's all." She dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with buttons and zippers. The clothes fit well enough, clean and warm against skin still remembering the bite of December cold. She caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized herself, hollow-eyed, gaunt, her coiled hair a tangled mess she didn't have the energy to fix. She looked exactly like what she was, someone barely holding on. Marcus led her back through the maze of corridors, down the grand staircase, through hallways that smelled of expensive wood polish and old money. They stopped outside a set of double doors. Inside, she could hear the clatter of silverware, the scrape of chair legs, young voices kept carefully quiet. "They've been through 4 nannies in 18 months, Marcus said, his voice low. "Don't expect gratitude." He pushed the doors open. The dining room was all dark wood and crystal, a table long enough to seat 20. At one end, 3 boys sat in a cluster, their breakfasts barely touched. Behind them, Stefan stood with his back to the windows, arms crossed, watching. The oldest boy saw her first. Tyler. 10 years old, with his father's sharp features and storm-gray eyes that held none of childhood's softness. He was lean and angular, sitting with the rigid posture of someone who learned too young that vulnerability was weakness. His gaze raked over Mariah with open contempt. "This is the new one?" Tyler's voice dripped with disdain. "She looks homeless." "Tyler." Stefan's tone held warning. "What?" "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." Tyler pushed his plate away. "How long until she runs away like the others? 2 weeks? 3? Mariah stood in the doorway, Marcus a solid presence behind her. She'd expected this. Had braced for it. But the venom in this child's voice still cut deeper than she'd prepared for. The middle child, Lorenzo, sat perfectly still beside his brother. 7 years old, with darker features and eyes that tracked movement like a predator learning to hunt. He said nothing, but his silence felt deliberate, assessing. He was reading her, she realized. Looking for weaknesses, cataloging her reactions. The youngest, Michael, was barely visible behind Tyler's shoulder. 5 years old, small for his age, with round cheeks and wide eyes that held too much fear for someone so young. He clutched a stuffed bear that had seen better days, its fur matted and one button eye hanging loose. "Mariah," Stefan said, his voice cutting through the tension. "These are my sons." Tyler, Lorenzo, and Michael. He moved behind the boys, placing a hand on Tyler's shoulder. The boy didn't flinch, but something hardened in his expression. They've been without a mother for 2 years. Their last nanny left 3 weeks ago. Because she was useless, Tyler interjected. Like all of them. Mariah found her voice, though it came out rougher than she intended. I'm not here to replace anyone. Tyler laughed, short and bitter. Good. Because you couldn't. He leaned forward, those gray eyes boring into hers. Why are you here? What did my father promise you? Money? A place to hide? What's so broken about you that you'd come to a place like this? The question landed like a physical blow. What's so broken about you? Her husband's words echoed in the child's voice, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. That's enough, Stefan said, his tone dropping into something dangerous. But Tyler wasn't finished. Did someone throw you away too? Is that it? His smile was cruel, learned from watching cruelty. You think being damaged makes you like us? Mariah's hands were shaking. She should say something. Defend herself. Fight back. But she had no fight left. Instead, she pulled out a chair far down the table, away from them, and sat. Not at their level. Not forcing proximity. Just present. Tyler watched her with narrowed eyes, clearly expecting her to argue, to plead, to try winning them over with false sweetness like the others probably had. She did none of those things. She simply sat, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze steady but not challenging. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and thick. Finally, Stefan spoke. Breakfast is over. Go to your tutors. The boys stood as one unit, Tyler leading, Lorenzo following, Michael clutching his bear and glancing back once with those two wide eyes before disappearing through a side door. Stefan approached where Mariah sat, his presence overwhelming. They will test you. Repeatedly. Viciously. I know, she whispered. Can you handle it? She thought of the bench. The cold. The emptiness. Being here, being tested by wounded children, still felt better than dying alone in the snow. I can show up, she said quietly. That's all I have. Something shifted in Stefan's expression. Not approval exactly. But not disappointment either. Then show up, he said, and walked away, leaving her alone in the vast, empty dining room. The storm hit on her 4th night in the mansion, rolling in from Lake Michigan with the kind of fury that made the windows rattle in their frames. Thunder cracked like artillery fire, shaking the walls, followed by lightning that turned the darkness into violent bursts of white. Mariah lay awake in her enormous bed, listening to rain hammer against glass, remembering other storms, other nights when she'd been alone and afraid. She was pulling on her robe when she heard it, a sound so small she almost missed it beneath the thunder. A whimper. High-pitched and desperate, coming from somewhere down the hall. Mariah stepped into the corridor, her bare feet silent on cold marble. The sound came again, muffled now, followed by rapid, panicked breathing. She followed it to a door she'd assumed was a linen closet, pressed her ear against the wood, and heard the unmistakable sound of a child crying. She opened the door slowly. Inside the narrow space, wedged between shelves of towels and spare bedding, Michael sat curled into the smallest ball possible. His stuffed bear was pressed against his face, his whole body shaking. His eyes were squeezed shut so tightly his face looked painful. Michael, Mariah said softly. He flinched violently, his eyes flying open. They were wild with terror, unseeing. Another crack of thunder made him scream, a raw sound that tore through her chest. She didn't ask permission. She simply sat down in the doorway, not crowding him, not reaching for him, just present. I'm here, she said quietly. You're not alone. Go away, he choked out between sobs. I'm not scared. I am, Mariah said. She pulled her knees to her chest, mirroring his position. Storms terrify me. Have since I was little. Michael's crying hitched. He stared at her through the darkness, confused. My grandmother used to sit with me when they got bad. Mariah continued, her voice barely audible over the rain. She taught me something that helped. Want me to show you? He didn't answer, but he didn't tell her to leave either. Put your hand on your stomach, she demonstrated, placing her palm flat against her abdomen. Now breathe in slowly while you count to 4. Feel your belly push out against your hand. She inhaled deeply, counting aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4. Michael watched, still trembling, still clutching his bear. Now hold it for 4 counts. She held her breath. Then let it out slowly. 4 counts again. She exhaled, making the count audible. Lightning flashed. Thunder followed immediately, so loud it felt like the house might crack open. Michael screamed again and pressed himself harder against the wall. With me this time, Mariah said, keeping her voice steady even though her own heart was racing. In for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Michael's breathing was ragged, desperate, but he tried. She could see his small hand pressed against his chest, rising and falling too quickly. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. They breathed together in the darkness, through thunder and lightning and the sound of rain that wouldn't stop. Slowly, gradually, Michael's breathing began to even out. His sobs quieted to hiccups, then to shaky exhales. My mama died in a storm, he whispered suddenly. Car accident. Lightning and rain and... His voice broke. Tyler said it's stupid to be scared. Said I need to be strong. Mariah's throat tightened. Being scared doesn't make you weak. And you don't have to be strong all the time. Not with me. They sat together until the storm passed, breathing in rhythm, and when Michael finally fell asleep against the towels, Mariah stayed until dawn, keeping watch over this small boy who'd lost too much. The next evening, she found Lorenzo in the library, staring at a book with an expression of pure frustration. He looked up sharply when she entered, his dark eyes wary. What do you want? I was looking for something to read, Mariah said honestly. She moved to the shelves, running her fingers along worn spines. This is an incredible collection. Lorenzo said nothing, but she could feel him watching her. She selected a book, an old copy of the Chronicles of Narnia, and settled into a chair near the fireplace. She didn't ask to sit with him. Didn't offer to help. Just opened the book and began reading aloud, her voice soft and steady. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. She'd read 3 pages when Lorenzo spoke. I can't read that well. Mariah looked up, careful to keep her expression neutral. Okay. The tutors kept leaving. They were afraid of my father. His hands were clenched into fists. So I'm behind. Tyler reads fine. Michael's too young. But I'm supposed to know this stuff and I don't. Then we'll work on it, Mariah said simply. If you want. Lorenzo studied her for a long moment, looking for mockery, for pity, for any reason not to trust her. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded once, sharp and decisive. That night became routine. After dinner, while Tyler disappeared to his room and Michael played with his bear, Mariah and Lorenzo sat in the library. She read slowly, tracking words with her finger, asking him to sound out phrases, celebrating small victories without fanfare. Tyler watched from doorways, silent and suspicious, but he stopped making cutting remarks at breakfast. Stopped testing her with cruel questions. He didn't warm to her, didn't seek her out, but he also didn't try to drive her away. It wasn't acceptance. But it wasn't warfare either. Small victories, Mariah thought, watching Michael breathe through his fear and Lorenzo sound out difficult words. She'd take them. Mariah couldn't sleep. 3 weeks in the mansion and her body still hadn't adjusted to the silence, the safety, the softness of expensive sheets. Old habits died hard. Part of her kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to tell her this was all a mistake and throw her back into the cold. She gave up fighting for rest around 2 in the morning and padded downstairs in bare feet and an oversized sweater, thinking tea might help. The house was different at night, all shadows and ambient light from security systems. Her footsteps echoed too loudly on marble floors. She was halfway to the kitchen when she heard it, the heavy side door that led to the garage opening, followed by voices speaking in low, urgent tones. She froze in the hallway, instinct screaming at her to hide, but curiosity and something darker kept her rooted in place. Stefan entered first, his white shirt painted with arterial spray, dark and still wet. Blood stained his hands, his neck speckled across his jaw. He moved with the calm precision of someone who'd done this before, who wore violence like a second skin. Behind him, Marcus and two other men carried something wrapped in plastic sheeting, the bundles large and unmistakably body-shaped. "Basement," Stefan said quietly. "Furnace is already running." Mariah's breath caught in her throat. The sound was small, barely audible, but in the silent house it might as well have been a gunshot. Stefan's head snapped toward her. Their eyes locked across the darkness. His expression didn't change. No surprise, no anger, just that same calculating assessment she'd seen the night he found her on the bench. "Take it down," he told his men without breaking eye contact with Mariah. "I'll be there shortly." Marcus hesitated, his hand moving toward his weapon, but Stefan raised one blood-stained hand. "It's fine. Go." The men disappeared through a door Mariah had assumed led to storage. She heard their footsteps descending, heavy with their burdens, and then nothing but the sound of her own heart hammering against her ribs. She should run. She should scream. She should do anything except stand there watching this man who'd saved her life transform into exactly what everyone said he was. "Kitchen," Stefan said, not a question. "Now." Her legs moved without permission, carrying her down the hall and through the swinging door into the massive kitchen. Industrial appliances gleamed in the low light. Stefan followed, shutting the door behind them with a soft click that sounded like a cell closing. He moved to the sink and began washing his hands, methodical and thorough, the water running pink then red then clear. Mariah stood by the island, gripping the marble edge so hard her fingers ached. "You weren't supposed to see that," Stefan said, reaching for a towel. "I know." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I couldn't sleep." He dried his hands slowly, considering her. "You're not screaming. Not running. Why? Where would I go?" The question came out bitter, honest. "Back to the streets? Back to the cold?" She met his gaze. "I knew what you were the night you found me. Everyone in Chicago knows your name. I just hadn't seen it up close." Stefan pulled out a chair and sat, suddenly looking exhausted in a way she'd never seen. The blood was gone from his hands but still stained his shirt, a brutal reminder of what he was capable of. "Her name was Lucia," he said quietly. "My wife. The boy's mother." He stared at nothing, his jaw tight. 7 years ago, a rival family decided the best way to hurt me was through her. Car bomb. She was taking the boys to school. His voice dropped to something raw and broken. She saw it. Realized what was about to happen. Threw herself over them in the back seat. The blast killed her instantly. Tyler still has scars. Michael doesn't remember her at all." Mariah's hand went to her mouth. "They wanted my family destroyed," Stefan continued, his gray eyes finding hers again. "So I destroyed theirs. Every last one. And I've spent 7 years making sure everyone in this city knows what happens when you threaten what's mine." He stood, moving closer. "You've seen what I am now. What I do. The blood isn't metaphorical, Mariah. It's real. And it doesn't wash off, no matter how hard you scrub." She should be terrified. Every instinct she had left should be screaming at her to run. But all she could see was 3 motherless boys upstairs, and a man who'd killed to protect them, and her own face reflected in the window behind him, hollow and lost and nowhere else to go. "I'm giving you a choice," Stefan said. "I'll give you money, new identity, protection. You can leave tomorrow and build a life somewhere else. Somewhere clean." He paused. "Or you stay, knowing exactly what this house is built on. Knowing the basement has a furnace that runs hot enough to erase people. Knowing that the man you're trusting with your life has blood on his hands that will never come clean. Mariah thought about Michael hiding in closets during storms. Lorenzo struggling with words he should have mastered years ago. Tyler's walls built so high nothing could reach him. 3 boys who needed someone to stay, who needed someone to not run away when things got hard. She thought about her grandmother's locket, still tucked in her nightstand drawer. About the bench in the snow. About being thrown away for being broken. "I'm staying," she said quietly. Stefan studied her for a long moment, searching for doubt, for fear, for any crack in her resolve. "Why?" "Because those boys upstairs deserve someone who won't leave." She swallowed hard. "And because I've got nowhere else to go anyway. Might as well be somewhere I'm needed." Something shifted in Stefan's expression, not quite a smile, but close. Respect, maybe? Or recognition of someone else who'd looked into the darkness and decided to walk in anyway. "Then welcome to the family," he said. "Such as it is." He left her alone in the kitchen, blood-stained and exhausted, heading back down to the basement where bodies burned and secrets turned to ash. Mariah made her tea with shaking hands and sat in the darkness, listening to the furnace roar to life below her feet, and wondered what kind of person it made her that she was staying anyway. If you're invested in Mariah's journey from broken to whole, don't miss what happens next. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. This story gets even more intense as Mariah confronts her past and fights for the family she's building. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. Subscribe now and let's continue this journey together. Morning came with fresh snow falling outside her window and the knowledge that she could leave sitting heavy in her chest. Stefan had meant what he said. She could walk away with enough money to start over somewhere warm and far from Chicago's brutal winters and buried secrets. Somewhere clean. She stayed in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, weighing freedom against 3 boys who'd already lost too much. It shouldn't have been a hard choice. Self-preservation should have won. But when she finally dressed and went downstairs, her suitcase remained empty in the closet. The boys were at breakfast, their usual careful silence filling the dining room. Stefan stood by the windows with his coffee, watching snow accumulate on the grounds. He looked up when she entered, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement, an understanding. She'd made her choice simply by showing up. "Good morning," she said, taking her usual seat at the far end of the table. Michael looked up from his oatmeal and offered her a shy smile. Lorenzo nodded, already absorbed in the book they'd been working through. Tyler's gaze flicked to her briefly, then away, but he didn't make any cutting remarks. Progress in its own way. The day unfolded in its usual rhythm. Tutors came and went, Marcus conducted security sweeps, Stefan disappeared into his office for hours. Mariah read with Lorenzo, helped Michael with a puzzle, and tried not to think about what burned in the basement furnace or what kind of person stayed in a house built on violence. Late afternoon found her in the garden, needing air despite the cold. The space was winter-barren but beautiful, all frost-covered hedges and skeletal trees wrapped in fairy lights that wouldn't be lit for hours. A stone bench sat beneath a bare oak, and she brushed snow from it before sitting, pulling Stefan's coat, which had somehow become hers, tighter around her shoulders. She didn't hear Tyler approach. He moved like his father, silent and deliberate, appearing at the garden's edge like a ghost. He stood there for a long moment, hands shoved in his pockets, looking anywhere but at her. "Can I sit?" His voice was stiff, formal, like the words cost him something. "Of course." He sat at the far end of the bench, leaving space between them, his jaw set in that hard line she'd come to recognize as fear masquerading as anger. They sat in silence, watching snow fall through bare branches. "I remember her voice," Tyler said suddenly. "My mother's. She used to sing when she cooked. Off-key, terrible, but she didn't care." His hands clenched into fists. "But I'm forgetting her face. I look at pictures and I know that's her, but I can't remember what it felt like when she smiled at me. Like the memory's fading and I can't stop it." Mariah's throat tightened. She thought about her grandmother, about loss, about how grief had its own cruel timeline. How old were you when she died? 8. Lorenzo was 5. Michael was 3. He doesn't remember her at all. Tyler's voice cracked slightly. I'm the only one who really knew her, and I'm losing her anyway. You're not losing her, Mariah said quietly. You're just learning that memory works different than we want it to. The feeling of her love, that doesn't fade. It changes shape, but it doesn't leave. Tyler turned to look at her finally, his gray eyes searching. The others all tried to replace her. Talked about being our new mom like she never existed. Like we should just forget and move on. I'm not trying to replace anyone, Mariah said. Your mother will always be your mother. I'm just... She paused, searching for the right words. I'm just someone who's here. Who's staying. That's all. Something in Tyler's expression softened, just fractionally. The nanny before you lasted 2 weeks. I put a dead rat in her bed. He said it matter-of-factly, watching for her reaction. That's disgusting, Mariah said. Also creative. Where'd you get the rat? The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Marcus has connections. I bet he does. They sat together as darkness crept in and the garden lights flickered to life, casting everything in warm gold. Tyler didn't move away. Didn't leave. Just sat there in comfortable silence until Marcus called them in for dinner. That night something shifted. Stefan actually sat down at the table instead of standing by the windows. Michael talked about his day without prompting. Lorenzo showed them a passage he'd read perfectly on his first try. And Tyler told a story about their mother that made everyone laugh, a real laugh, the kind that echoed off crystal and made the massive dining room feel smaller, warmer, almost like a home. Mariah watched them across the table, this broken family stitching itself back together in fits and starts, and felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Not quite belonging, not yet. But the beginning of it. The possibility. Stefan caught her eye and raised his wine glass slightly, a silent acknowledgement. She'd chosen to stay, and somehow that choice was becoming less about having nowhere else to go and more about not wanting to be anywhere else. After dinner, Michael climbed into her lap while she read to Lorenzo, his small body trusting and warm. Tyler lingered in the doorway, not joining but not leaving either. And somewhere in the depths of the house, Stefan handled whatever darkness needed handling so that this moment, this fragile, precious moment, could exist untouched. Mariah held Michael closer and kept reading, her voice steady, her heart finally beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, broken things could learn to fit together after all. The park was Michael's favorite, a sprawling winter wonderland with freshly plowed paths and a playground that somehow looked magical under February snow. Mariah had taken all 3 boys, Marcus trailing at a discreet distance, his presence both protective and suffocating. She was learning to live with the constant shadow of security, the unspoken reminder that Stefan's world came with dangers she couldn't always see. Michael was on the swings, pumping his legs with fierce determination while Lorenzo pushed him higher. Tyler stood near Mariah, pretending he was too old for playground equipment, but watching his brothers with barely concealed affection. It was a good day. A normal day. Then she saw him. Her ex-husband stood 30 feet away near the park entrance, hands in the pockets of an expensive coat she didn't recognize, his face breaking into that smile, the one he used for outsiders, for people he needed to charm. The one that never reached his eyes. Everything inside Mariah went cold and still. Mariah! He called out, waving like they were old friends having a chance encounter. Like he hadn't thrown her into the street. Like he hadn't destroyed her. I thought that was you! Marcus materialized at her elbow instantly, his hand moving inside his jacket. That him? She couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. Her body remembered before her mind caught up. The way he grabbed her wrist, the sound of his voice calling her worthless, the door locking behind her with everything she owned in a single suitcase. Her ex-husband approached with that easy confidence, that same walk that used to make her feel safe before she learned what lived underneath. He was well-dressed, clean-shaven, looking healthy and successful while she'd been freezing on a bench just weeks ago. Been looking everywhere for you, baby. His voice was warm honey laced with poison. You had me so worried. He reached for her arm. Marcus's hand shot out, catching his wrist mid-reach. Don't. Her ex's eyes went cold for just a flash before the charming mask slid back into place. And who are you? Her bodyguard? He laughed like it was ridiculous. Mariah, what's going on? Who are these people? Tyler moved closer to her other side, his young face hard and assessing. He'd recognized the threat without needing explanation. You need to leave. Mariah managed, her voice thin but steady. No. Leave? Her ex's expression twisted into something uglier. I'm your husband. We need to talk about you abandoning our marriage, taking off without a word. His voice dropped lower, meant only for her. Making me look like a fool in front of everyone. You threw me out, she hissed. Your word against mine, sweetheart. His smile was vicious. And I've got documentation. Witnesses. A very sad story about my troubled wife who ran away in the middle of the night. He pulled folded papers from his coat. Legal documents. You abandoned the marriage. That means you owe me compensation for wasted time, emotional distress, and the fertility treatments I paid for that went nowhere because you're defective. Marcus moved, but Mariah's hand on his arm stopped him. She could see other security materializing from the edges of the park, drawn by Marcus's posture. She could see curious parents watching. Michael had stopped swinging, sensing something wrong. Those papers mean nothing, she said, forcing strength into her voice she didn't feel. They mean everything in court. I've got lawyers, Mariah. Good ones. You've got. He looked around deliberately at the boys, at Marcus, letting his gaze linger with calculated cruelty. Whatever this is. Playing house with someone else's kids? This your new job? Nanny for some rich family? He stepped closer, dropping his voice to a venomous whisper. You couldn't give me children, so you're stealing someone else's? Come home where you belong before I make your life even more miserable than it already is. She's not going anywhere with you. Stefan's voice cut through the cold air like a blade. He appeared from the parking lot, his long coat billowing slightly, his presence transforming the entire dynamic instantly. He moved with that predatory grace, that absolute authority that made grown men step back. Her ex-husband paled slightly but held his ground. And you are? The person who decides whether you walk out of this park or get carried out. Stefan's tone was conversational, almost pleasant, which somehow made it more terrifying. Mariah, take the boys to the car. Marcus will drive you home. Stefan, she started. No. Not angry. Not loud. Just absolute. Tyler grabbed Michael's hand. Lorenzo moved to her other side. They walked toward the SUV, but Mariah looked back once to see Stefan standing face to face with her ex-husband, speaking in low tones that made the other man's cocky expression crumble into something closer to terror. At home, Stefan found her in the library an hour later. She was staring at nothing, her hands shaking, the legal papers her ex-husband had shoved at her spread across the coffee table like evidence of her failure. He's gone, Stefan said simply. Won't bother you again. What did you do? Her voice was hollow. Nothing permanent. Yet. Stefan sat across from her, his gray eyes cold and calculating. But I can make him disappear. One phone call. He'll never touch you, speak to you, or breathe in your direction again. The offer hung between them, tempting and terrible. She could see Stefan meant it. Would do it without hesitation. For her. No, Mariah said, the word surprising her with its firmness. Not like that. Stefan's eyebrows rose slightly. If you handle it your way, I'll never be free of him. Not really. I'll always know he's out there somewhere, hidden in your basement or buried in the lake, and that'll be another weight I carry. She met his gaze steadily. I need to face this legally. Properly. Fight him in court and win because the law is on my side, not because he's too scared or dead to fight back. He has lawyers. Money. Documents that could cause problems. Then get me better lawyers. She straightened, feeling something that might have been strength returning to her spine. You said I could stay. You said I was part of this family. So help me fight him the right way. Help me prove that those papers are lies, that he's the one who abandoned me, not the other way around. Stefan studied her for a long moment, that calculating expression shifting into something that might have been approval. It'll be expensive. Complicated. He'll fight dirty. Let him fight, Mariah said. I'm done running. Done letting him define who I am and what I'm worth. She thought of Michael's smile, Lorenzo's progress, Tyler's almost trust. I've got too much here to protect. Stefan's mouth quirked into something almost like a smile. All right. We'll do it your way. He stood, pulling out his phone. But Mariah? If he comes near you or the boys again, legal process be damned. Some threats get handled permanently. She nodded, understanding the compromise. Stefan would give her this fight, this chance to reclaim herself through proper channels. But his protection came with teeth, and she was learning to accept that both things could be true. Her past had found her, but this time, she wasn't facing it alone. The Cook County Courthouse was all marble and mahogany, cold fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick, and the particular silence that came from too many broken lives being sorted through legal channels. Mariah sat at the plaintiff's table in a borrowed suit, navy blue, professional, expensive enough to signal she wasn't the desperate woman her ex-husband wanted everyone to believe she was. Stefan's lawyers flanked her, a wall of tailored competence that had cost more than her old house. Her ex-husband sat across the aisle with his own legal team, smaller but scrappy, and that same charming smile plastered on his face. He'd cleaned up well for court, expensive suit, fresh haircut, the picture of a concerned husband wronged by his unstable wife. She could see him working the room already, making eye contact with the judge, nodding sympathetically at appropriate moments. The gallery behind them held a sparse crowd. Marcus sat in the back row, his presence a quiet reminder of the world Mariah now inhabited. And 3 rows up, looking small and out of place in their formal clothes, sat Tyler, Lorenzo, and Michael. Stefan had wanted to keep them home. Said they didn't need to see this, didn't need to be exposed to the ugliness of courtroom battles. But Tyler had insisted, his young face set with determination. She sat with us when we were scared, he'd said. Now we sit with her. So there they were, 3 boys who'd already witnessed too much, choosing to witness this too. The judge entered, a severe woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that suggested she'd heard every lie and excuse the legal system had to offer. Let's proceed. Her ex-husband's lawyer stood first, launching into a narrative Mariah barely recognized. In his version, she was erratic, emotionally volatile, making rash decisions and abandoning a loving marriage without warning. He produced documentation, text messages taken out of context, financial records showing the fertility treatments her ex-husband had, generously, paid for, statements from friends claiming Mariah had been difficult and withdrawn. My client invested years and significant resources into this marriage, the lawyer said smoothly. He supported Mrs. James through multiple failed treatments, through emotional instability, through her inability to fulfill basic marital expectations. And how was he repaid? She disappeared in the middle of the night, no warning, no discussion, and has now taken up residence with. He paused dramatically. A known criminal enterprise. Living with a man whose business activities are currently under federal investigation, surrounded by his children, exposing herself to danger and illegal activity. Mariah's hands clenched beneath the table. Stefan's lead lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Ross, remained perfectly still beside her, making notes with precise, controlled movements. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, Mr. James seeks compensation for the emotional and financial damage caused by his wife's abandonment. Medical bills, therapy costs, and the humiliation of having his personal life exposed because of her reckless behavior. When he finally sat down, her ex-husband looked appropriately wounded, like a man betrayed by someone he'd only ever tried to help. Catherine stood with lethal grace. Your Honor, may I call Mrs. James to the stand? The walk to the witness box felt endless. Mariah's legs shook, her stomach churned, but she kept her eyes forward. Avoided looking at her ex-husband. Focused instead on the 3 boys in the gallery. Tyler's steady gaze, Lorenzo's encouraging nod, Michael's small wave. She was sworn in, sat down, and met Catherine's eyes. "Mrs. James, tell us about the night you left." Mariah took a breath. Then another. Found her voice somewhere in the hollow space where fear used to live. "He threw me out," she said clearly. "Packed my suitcase, threw it on the porch, and told me no man would ever want damaged goods that couldn't do the one thing women are supposed to do." Her voice steadied. "That was after months of verbal abuse, isolation from friends and family, and being blamed for medical conditions I had no control over. The defense claims you left voluntarily. I left because I was discarded." Mariah's gaze finally moved to her ex-husband. He was staring at her with that familiar expression, the one that used to make her feel small, worthless, invisible. But she wasn't that woman anymore. "He made me believe I was broken, worthless, that my value as a person ended when I couldn't give him children. He controlled every aspect of my life, who I saw, where I went, how I spent money. And when I finally failed him in the way that mattered most to him, he erased me." "Did he physically harm you?" Mariah pulled up her sleeve, revealing the faint scar on her wrist where he'd grabbed her hard enough to crack bone. "This was from our last fight. He said it was my fault for making him angry." Catherine guided her through the testimony with surgical precision. The fertility treatments her ex-husband claimed to have, generously funded, had been paid for with Mariah's inheritance from her grandmother. The friends claiming she was difficult were his friends, people who'd never spoken to her directly. The narrative of abandonment crumbled under the weight of bank records, medical documentation, and text messages showing a pattern of escalating verbal abuse. Then came cross-examination. Her ex-husband's lawyer circled like a shark, trying to rattle her, to make her seem unstable, vindictive, opportunistic. "Isn't it true you're now living with a man under federal investigation?" "I'm living in a home where I'm safe and valued." "A home funded by criminal activity." "Alleged criminal activity," Catherine interjected. "Mr. Luigi has never been convicted of anything, and this hearing isn't about him." The lawyer shifted tactics. "You claim abuse, but you never filed a police report. Never sought a restraining order. Never told anyone until it became convenient for this case." Mariah's hands trembled, but her voice held steady. "I didn't report it because I was conditioned to believe it was my fault. That's what abuse does, it makes you think you deserve it. That you're the problem." She looked directly at her ex-husband, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not a monster. Not a savior. Just a cruel, small man who tried to break her and failed. "But I'm not his to own. I never was. And I'm done letting him define my worth." The courtroom was silent. The judge was watching with an expression that might have been understanding. In the gallery, Tyler was sitting straighter, Lorenzo had tears in his eyes, and Michael was gripping his stuffed bear tight. Her ex-husband's mask finally slipped. His face twisted into something ugly and familiar, rage barely controlled, the real man underneath the charm. "You're nothing without me," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Broken, barren, worthless." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Mr. James, control yourself or you'll be held in contempt." But the damage was done. The jury, the judge, everyone in that courtroom had just witnessed exactly what Mariah had been describing. The real him, stripped of pretense. Catherine rested her case. Closing arguments were brief. And when the judge finally ruled, dismissing all financial claims against Mariah, granting her a restraining order, and suggesting Mr. James seek therapy, Mariah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Free. She walked out of that courtroom with Catherine beside her, Marcus ahead clearing a path, and 3 boys surrounding her like guards. Stefan waited by the car, and when their eyes met, she saw something in his expression she couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe? Or recognition of someone who'd stared down their demons and won. "It's over," she said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. "It's over," Stefan agreed. Then quieter meant only for her. "You were magnificent." They drove home through Chicago streets, and for the first time since she'd arrived in this city freezing and broken, Mariah felt like she might actually survive what came next. The evidence came in waves over the following weeks, each revelation more damning than the last. Stefan's team, lawyers, investigators, people whose job descriptions Mariah deliberately didn't ask about, had torn through her ex-husband's life with surgical precision. What they found went far beyond emotional abuse. Fraud. He'd been funneling money from joint accounts into offshore holdings, then claiming poverty during the fertility treatments. Harassment. Dozens of threatening messages sent from burner phones after she'd left, messages Marcus had been quietly documenting. Insurance fraud related to the emotional distress, he'd claimed. And restraining order violations. He'd been watching the house, following them, photographing Mariah with the boys and trying to build a case for her being unfit. Catherine Ross delivered the news in Stefan's office, her expression professionally neutral but with a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. The DA is filing charges. With the evidence we've provided, he's looking at 2 to 5 years minimum. He'll likely take a plea deal. Mariah sat in the leather chair across from Stefan's desk, processing. Her ex-husband, the man who'd made her feel worthless, who'd convinced her she was broken, was going to prison. Not because of Stefan's darker methods, but because of his own choices, his own crimes, exposed by the light of legal scrutiny. He can't hurt you anymore, Stefan said quietly after Catherine left. It's done. She should feel triumphant. Vindicated. Something. Instead, she just felt tired and strangely empty. Like she'd been carrying a weight for so long that removing it left her off balance. I don't know what to feel, she admitted. Feel whatever you need to feel. Stefan moved from behind his desk to sit beside her. You don't owe anyone a particular reaction. Not even yourself. They sat in comfortable silence, and Mariah realized this had become familiar, these quiet moments with Stefan where words weren't necessary. Over the past months, something had shifted between them. Subtle. Undeniable. The way his hand would linger on her shoulder when he passed. How she'd started waiting for the sound of his car in the evening. The looks that held a beat too long. But neither of them had named it. Hadn't pushed. There was too much history, too much healing still happening, too many complications to rush into anything. Spring came slowly to Chicago. Melting snow revealing brown grass and the promise of green underneath. Michael's nightmares about storms had lessened. He still came to find her sometimes, but now he could breathe through his fear without falling apart. Lorenzo was reading at grade level, devouring books faster than she could supply them. And Tyler had started calling her by name instead of you or she, which felt like the greatest victory of all. The garden came alive again, and Mariah spent an afternoon helping Michael plant flowers in the beds his mother had designed years ago. Tyler and Lorenzo joined them eventually, pretending they were too old for gardening but unable to resist Michael's enthusiasm. Mom used to plant tulips here, Tyler said quietly, kneeling beside a flower bed. Red ones. They were her favorite. Then that's what we'll plant, Mariah said, not trying to replace the memory but honor it. They worked in companionable silence, dirt under their fingernails, sun warm on their backs. Stefan watched from the study window, his expression unreadable. That evening, after dinner and reading time and Michael's increasingly brief ritual of checking for storms, Stefan found Mariah in the library. She was curled in her favorite chair, her grandmother's locket open in her palm, studying the faded photograph inside. I need to talk to you, Stefan said. All of you. Something in his tone made her nervous. She followed him to the family room, a smaller, warmer space they'd claimed as their own over the months. The boys were already there, Tyler on the couch, Lorenzo cross-legged on the floor, Michael building something with blocks. Stefan stood by the fireplace, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I've been thinking about the future. About what comes next for this family. Mariah's heart started racing. Was he sending her away? Had she overstayed her welcome? Had she misread everything? The thing is, Stefan continued, his gray eyes finding hers, we've been operating in this strange limbo. You're here, but not officially. You're part of us, but we haven't named it. He paused. The boys and I talked, and we have a question for you. Michael abandoned his blocks and climbed into Stefan's arms with the easy trust of a child who'd learned safety again. Lorenzo stood, moving closer to his father. Tyler remained seated but leaned forward, his expression serious and open in a way Mariah had rarely seen. Does this mean you're staying forever? Michael asked, his small voice cutting straight to the heart of everything. Mariah's breath caught. She looked at each of them, Michael with his round face and trusting eyes, Lorenzo who'd let her into his struggles and victories, Tyler who'd built walls and then carefully, deliberately, let her through them. Because we want you to, Lorenzo added quietly. We're asking you to marry him, Tyler said bluntly, gesturing to Stefan. To actually be part of this family. Legally. Permanently. Not just someone who might leave when things get hard. Stefan's expression was carefully controlled, but she could see the vulnerability underneath. I'm not offering you rescue, Mariah. You've already saved yourself. I'm offering you a choice: stay as you are, welcome and cared for, or stay as something more. As my wife. As their. He paused, choosing words carefully. As someone who chooses them as much as they're choosing you. We know you're not trying to replace Mom, Tyler continued, his voice steadier than it had any right to be. But you're here. You stayed when you didn't have to. You fought for us. You showed up every single day even when we were terrible to you. That means something. Mariah's eyes burned with tears she didn't try to hide. She thought about the woman she'd been on that frozen bench, broken, discarded, convinced her worth ended with her ability to bear children. She thought about the grandmother who'd taught her to breathe through fear. About her ex-husband's voice calling her worthless. About learning that family could be chosen, built, earned through presence and consistency and love that showed up even when it was hard. I'm not their biological mother, she said quietly. I can never be that. We don't need you to be, Stefan said. We need you to be exactly who you are. Someone who reads to Lorenzo every night. Who sits with Michael during storms. Who let Tyler test her and push her and stayed anyway. He stepped closer, Michael still in his arms. Someone who makes this house feel less like a fortress and more like a home. Someone who's ours, Michael said simply, with the devastating honesty only children possess. Mariah looked at her grandmother's locket, still open in her palm. The woman in the photograph smiled up at her, and she could almost hear her voice. Family is whoever stays, baby girl. Whoever shows up and loves you through the hard parts. She'd come to Chicago with nothing. Been thrown away for being broken. Believed the lie that her inability to bear children made her worthless. But these three boys had taught her something different, that motherhood wasn't about biology. It was about showing up. About consistency. About choosing each other, again and again, even when it was difficult. Yes, she said, her voice breaking on the word. Yes, I'm staying. Forever. Michael launched himself at her, nearly knocking her over. Lorenzo hugged her waist tight. And Tyler stood and wrapped his arms around all of them, his young face pressed against her shoulder, and whispered, Thank you for not leaving us. Stefan pulled them all closer, this family they'd assembled from broken pieces, and Mariah felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever, whole. The wedding was small, held in the garden among the tulips they'd planted together. Marcus stood as witness, looking uncomfortable in formal wear. Catherine Ross attended with a rare smile. The boys wore matching suits and stood beside Stefan, their family complete in a way none of them had expected. When the officiant asked if she took Stefan Luigi as her husband, Mariah thought about the girl she'd been, desperate and freezing, clutching a broken locket, ready to give up. She thought about the woman she'd become, scarred but stronger, chosen in choosing, building a family from intention rather than obligation. I do, she said clearly, and meant it with every broken, healed piece of herself. That evening, as dusk settled over Chicago and the first stars appeared, Mariah stood at the bedroom window watching the boys play in the garden below. Michael was chasing fireflies, his laughter carrying on the warm air. Lorenzo and Tyler were engaged in some elaborate game involving sticks and complicated rules. They were happy. Safe. Loved. Stefan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. Any regrets? She touched the locket around her neck, her grandmother's gift, her link to a past that had shaped her but no longer defined her. Not one. Below them, Michael called out, Mariah! Come catch fireflies with us. Not the nanny. Not her. Just her name, called with joy and expectation and the absolute certainty that she would come. Stefan kissed her temple. Go. I'll be down in a minute. She descended the stairs and burst into the garden, where 3 boys mobbed her with hugs and laughter and demands that she admire the fireflies they'd caught in cupped hands. The evening air was warm, full of possibility, and the sound of a family that had chosen each other. Mariah Luigi looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky and thought about frozen benches and cruel words and all the ways she believed herself broken. She thought about the mafia boss who'd seen her dying and offered a door instead of pity. About 3 motherless boys who'd taught her that family was built, not born. About finding wholeness in the most unexpected places. She'd come to Chicago to die. Instead, she'd learned to live. And as Michael's small hand slipped into hers, trusting and warm, Mariah finally understood she hadn't needed fixing. She just needed to be seen, truly seen, and chosen anyway. The fireflies danced in the gathering darkness, and somewhere in the mansion behind them, the lights were on, windows glowing with welcome. She was home. She was loved. She was exactly where she belonged. And her future, finally, was her own. Mariah's story proves that sometimes the family we choose means more than the one we're born into. If this touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about resilience, redemption, and finding home in unexpected places. Drop a comment below and tell me, what moment hit you hardest? Was it when Stefan found her on the bench? When Michael hid during the storm? Or when Tyler finally let his walls down? I read every single comment. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story about rising from rock bottom and building something beautiful from broken pieces, share this video with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that our worth isn't defined by what we can't do, but by who we choose to become. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until then, remember, you're not broken, you're just becoming.